Okay, so good morning. We are on Daf Ayin Zion of Bava Metzia. We've started now the sixth parak, which deals with employment issues. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Um, at the end of yesterday's Daf, the Gemara dealt with a case where conditions changed in a manner that made it impossible for the worker to complete the job for which he was hired. And we saw that the following teaching of Rava that relates directly to this kind of case, that if one hired, Rava said, workers to dig, and then it rained overnight, and it was clear that the drainage on this field is terrible. So there's water everywhere, and there's really no point in trying to dig because it's just so wet and infused with water that the digging will is totally pointless. In that situation, if the land was inspected the prior evening, so that the assumption is that the workers would be able to tell that if it rained overnight, they would know that the job is effectively canceled and effectively canceled before they come to work the next morning. And so as a result, it's the workers who lose. But if the land was not investigated, meaning that the workers did not know the land and the homeowner did not inform them effectively of the nature of the land, and then they come to work the next day because they figure, so what if it rains? I'm sure that the field is a field that can deal with it. And then it turns out that the field is not one that can be dealt with when it's filled with rainwater. So then the homeowner is going to lose, and he needs to pay the workers. Now, how much does he need to pay? So Rava says that he pays the workers like an idle worker. What does that mean? We saw that, I believe, yesterday as well, that it means that effectively, let's say I would have to pay you $100 to carry a whole bunch of boxes from one place to the next. And then instead of having to do that, I instead say, you know what? You don't have to carry the boxes. All you have to do is sit here and watch the boxes. So now the job has completely shifted, and it's no longer requiring the same kind of muscular skill and same kind of effort. And so as a result, you're going to get a lower payment. So we're going to pay you like the amount that you would have to get paid to effectively do nothing, not the amount that you would get paid to do the work for which you were hired. So that was the first statement of Rava, and now the Gemara is going to
So
offer.
you want to learn that it rained overnight. Yesterday, Dove said we shouldn't learn it that way. We should learn that because that would uh sort of influence us in a certain way. He wants to say that it was already feel. That's what the way we learned yesterday with Dove that the field was already wet. It was filled with water, and that they didn't inspect it the night before, and then but to say that it rained overnight, that sort of throws a wrench in it. He wanted to say it was already filled with water. It wasn't just that it rained the night before.
All right, obviously that makes it a much easier case. There's no question that that's certainly an easier case, that if it was already wet and saturated with water, then then it would be that situation. I don't think you have to read it that way. Because yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You can read it. You can read it. You definitely can read it that way, and certainly that, like I said, that you're certainly right that makes it easier. I thought, yeah, I mean, Rashi specifically says, if we take a look at the second to last Rashi on Ayin Vav Mabet, Hadasaira la'aram urza, right? They went and checked it in the evening. Below Hevinu Shahaya Laka Oshiyardu Geshamim Belila. He offers that two possibilities. Either they didn't realize how waterlogged it was, or it rained in the night. So leis lu klal, then they don't have any kind of claim to chazdu inu gufaya because they themselves had seen it. But almanas nistakru, and it was only on that basis that he hired that the guy hired them. So v'hari lo yecholin, now they're not able to do the job. Below hayalahen leilik baboker, and they shouldn't have gone in the morning. But you could see that Rashi specifically incorporates shayar dugasham. So that there's the possibility of rain overnight. So again, you certainly like Dove said, that makes it an easier case. It's certainly more understandable why we would hold the workers responsible. But obviously, one can imagine a situation where the result was obviously going to be the case, that if it rained, it would be a disgusting muddy mess that nobody would want dug. So, but either way, the bottom line is that when the workers should have realized that the job would not be necessary the next morning, and yet they come to the job anyway, well, then they're not going to have any kind of claim whatsoever. But where the workers did not have that background, then they would get paid. Okay, so that's teaching number one. V'amar Rava, now teaching number two, and the first of the three additional teachings of Rava. Haiman de oger agure diladavla. If you hire a worker in order to irrigate, va'asa mitra, and now rain came, and so as a result, the field no longer needed the irrigation. Say the depolim, the workers lose because it's clear that when the rain comes, they're not going to be necessary. And so it's clear that that's a condition of the hiring. Asanara, however, if the river overflows, and that's why the field is no longer requiring any watering, we'll say to the balabais, that isn't an obvious condition of a field. And so as a result, we're going to say that the owner still has to pay the workers. The Yoav Lahu Kifo al Batel, and again he pays the worker like somebody who's not working, meaning you don't pay him the full cost of the job because he doesn't have to do all the work. And Rashi explains, Pseta de Balabayas, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Ayin Zion Amud Aleph. I don't know that I said it specifically, but we began on the third line of Ayin Zion Amud Aleph. Excuse me. And so again, back into Rashi. To Polim, Einan Yodin, Bimin Hagsadeu. People don't know the particular customs and likelihoods of any particular field, of your particular field. Shiahe Nar Ola Lahashkoto, that the river will rise up and cause it to be watered. Ahu Yodea. But the owner, of course, does know that can happen. And so as a result, if he doesn't make it explicit and doesn't actually make it affirmative part of the contract, well, then you have to go based on what the workers assumed would be the case. And the workers would assume that the case is that they are only they're hired unless it rains. Okay. So next question. So next statement of Rava. V'amar Rava, Haiman de Oger Agurila Dabla. Now, again, you're trying to hire somebody to irrigate the field. Upazak Naro Bapalga Dioma. And now, all of a sudden, the water has gone down from the river in the middle of the day. And Rashi explains, Shemimenu Mashkin, that's the river from which they're drawing the water. And so as a result, there's no more work to do because you can't draw any more water from a river that has stopped flowing. So ilo avid depasik. If it's something that's unusual, so say the depoalim, well, then it's a loss for the workers because again, it's understood that this is effectively a condition on both sides of it, and as a result, there's nothing that the owner could do. It's not like the owner could have prepared ahead of time. Nobody knew this was going to be expected, and so as a result, it's understood that the condition of the hiring is as long as there's nothing that stops everybody from being able to do it, do the work. And so here that now they can't do the work, and it was something that couldn't be predicted. So as a result, we're going to say, that the loss is on the workers of the pasuk. Now, what happens if it does usually stop flowing? Obene masa, or the people are so ibene masa. So if they're from that particular town, say the Depolim, well, then the workers lose because that again they would know that it stops flowing. So as a result, everybody understands. It's just like the rain case that we had in the prior ruling of Rava, where everybody knows that if it rains, it's not going to be necessary. But but if they're lavine masa, if they're not from the town, so then say the balabais. Well, then again, the owner knew and therefore should have explained the risk to the employees. By failing to explain the risk, and by knowing about the risk and failing to explain the risk, it's just like the case of when the river swells, and which we said that is a loss for the owner. Okay, so that's ruling number 2 of the 3 additional rulings of Rava. Now we have
In
the
a case
third.
where it's obvious, where everyone knows this city, we're saying that the Polim postim, right? We say that the Polim. What should they have done? They shouldn't. They're not going to get their wages. But what should they have done if they know it's going to rain? Should they go to another city? Should they go? And they're
Excellent
losing.
question. So what the issue is that they don't need to show up the next morning, and they
Right.
can look for other work.
Right.
So
Okay.
so the
So
point is that they shouldn't waste their time
right.
because they
Okay.
knew that. So again, it's not a perfect situation. They're going to lose out, right? I mean, they may have turned away other work over the course of the night because we're going to get paid more for this work. But the issue is that either they knew about the risk or there wasn't anything that anyone could do. In both of those situations, we're going to say that the risk is on the workers. And in that latter situation, one can understand, and I believe some of the Rishonim talk about it this way, that one can understand it, that in the case where nobody really could have known about it, it's hamotzi mechavero alavaraya, that basically, you need to bring proof that the other guy could have done something about it. And since that's not likely to happen, that's why the workers lose. But that's not a universal position. I just note that one can help. It can help one understand why the workers lose in a case where sort of it was totally unpredictable. Okay, so let's go to the last of the rulings of Rava. Amar Rava, Haiman de Agar Agore La'avidta. So again, you now hire workers to do some work. Vishalim Avidta Bifalga Dioma, and they finished the job. They were very efficient. They finished the job in the middle of the day. And so, if you've got other work that is easier to do, well then Yahivlahu, you could give it to them to do because they were hired for the whole day. Inami de kavasa mafkad, or if you got something that's exactly equal to it, so then again you can give it to them. You can ask them to do it, tell them to do it. De kashamina, but if it's more difficult from it, lo mafkad lahu, then you can't give it to them to do. You can't tell them to do it. V'nozin lehem skarim mishalim, and in all these situations, you got to give them their full wages because again, they were successful in completing the job. And so as a result, that's the story. So Amai, why do you get to pay? Why do you have to pay for the second half of the day as if they were actually working when in fact they didn't have to do anything? So let them get paid like an idle worker. So Kikama Rava ba'achalushe de mechosa. He was talking about people who were like the carriers of mechosa, de lo of the chalshe, because when they're not working, they get weaker. The point is that for many positions, if you don't continue to do the job, well, then you become less efficient and less effective at it over time because either the muscles atrophy or the muscle memory atrophies. The bottom line is that you need to keep doing it. And so let's take a look at some Rashi here. Achalushe de mechuza, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think 3, 6, 8 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Achalushi de mechuza, the mechuza shehu iro shel Rabba. Well, Rabba was the what was in mechuza. So hayu hayu b'nei adam. There were people haragilim lis'eis masos who would carry burdens tamid all the time. Because yoshvin betelim, and when they sat idle, that when they weren't doing any work, kashalahen, it made it harder for them to do the next job. So so now we're going to go back and analyze a brisa that we quoted yesterday. So let's take a look at
So we're paying them by the job and not by the hour, and not necessarily by the day either.
No, we're paying them by, this is definitely a day labor. You've hired them for the full day, but we break it down by the hours. And we saw yesterday that if the worker stopped in the middle, you have to pay them a certain amount. In fact, that was the Mishnah that opened the Perek. And we're going to see that, we're going to get back to that Mishnah over the course of today. So to the extent that you have questions on that particular point, let's hold them, because I think you'll see some of the answers that will come out. So Amar Mar. So again, we quoted a brisa yesterday where we said the following: Shaman lahem es masha asu. We evaluate what they already did. So if somebody refuses to finish their job, so then Kate said, how do we do this? So again, we're going to assume, the assumption in this statement is that the person is supposed to be paid 8 dinar for the day, and now the price of labor has gone up so that half of the day is worth 6 dinar instead of 4 dinar. Well, nosen lahem sela. You still have to give them the 4 dinar that they were supposed to get paid in the very beginning. So what don't you have to do? You don't reduce it to 2 dinar, because I might have thought that you should reduce it to 2 dinar, because now you're going to have to hire somebody else, and the somebody else that you're going to have to hire is going to charge you 6 dinar for the second half of the day. And so now you thought you were going to get all the work done for 8 dinar, and so now you're going to end up paying 10 dinar, 4 dinar for the first half, and 6 dinar for the second half. And we say, no, tough luck. That's exactly right. You're going to end up having to pay 10 dinar, even though the value of the negotiated price turned out to be in your favor. The person didn't want to finish, and so we don't force them. So kasabri rabbanan. So this all shows that the rabbis, the Tanakama in this brisa, say that yad poel al helyona, the worker has the upper hand. That even though he reneged on the completion of the job, and even though the boss is now going to have to pay more for the completion of the job than he was going to under the first worker, the first worker gets the full value of the proportional amount that he had contracted to complete. And so since he had agreed to do the whole day for 8, and he's done only half the day, so we're going to pay him 4. So now the brisa continues. O yigmaru malachtan v'yitlu shnei salam. Or if the person wants, he can complete the work and collect the 2 sela. He doesn't get the benefit of the higher wage because he didn't negotiate for that higher wage. That just happens to be the prevailing wage at midday. But he's going to get the 2 sela. Well, pshita, isn't it obvious that the worker gets exactly what he agreed to? Why would anyone think that he should get anything else? So lo tzricha de iyakar avinta. No, we're talking about where the cost of labor has gone up. The imru polim, and the polim said something. They left the job, right? But azol bala bayasu paisinhu, and the owner went to them and said, "Listen, I really need your help. Please don't walk away from me." And he got them to come back and do the work. So Mao de Tema, what might you have thought? I might have thought that Matsu Amrile, that the workers could say to the employer, keep Mifai Sinan, adaita de tafas lan agra. When you appeased us, we understood that that meant that you were going to give us the prevailing wage, not our originally contracted wage. Hamash malan de amar lahu. So the owner comes to teach us that when we say that he gets paid the original wage, the owner can say, nah, I was just trying to say that I was going to give you some food and drink. I'm not going to give you the higher wage that is now prevailing. I never agreed to that. Of course, if the owner did explicitly agree to it, the implication or the simple implication of this Gemara would be that in fact the owner would have to pay increased wages. And there's a debate among the Rishonim as to whether or not that is the proper read, or whether even in the case where the person agreed to pay a higher wages, you still get to pay the original wages. Okay, so that's the situation. And Sela, no saying lehem sell, meaning that if he agreed to work for a Sela, well, then you get paid if the work was worth a Sela based on the current amount. So then you get paid a Sela. Well, Pshita, that's obvious. Why would you think that the employer should pay something different from the amount that the work was worth? So, ulo, no, it actually was necessary. Well, what if the work was originally less expensive? So when you agreed to pay a seller, it was ba'agrinhu b'tvei zuzah. You were going to give him an extra zuz. So he agreed to pay 2 seller for the job, which is 8 zuz. But at the time, the entire job was worth only 7 zuz, at least according to some workers. And so he could have gotten away with giving 7 zuz, but he agreed to give 8 zuz. Vilasof iyakar avita. But now the labor became more expensive, and now it's worth 8 zuz for the day, and everybody agrees that it's 8 zuz. The kombit zuze. And so and it's now goes for a zuz more than it was. So it was 7, now it's 8. So Maudatema, what might I have thought? The Amrile Tve Zuze Amratlan. You told us that we were going to get an extra zuz over the prevailing weight. Tve Zuza Havlan. So as a result, you should give us a zuz more than you were supposed to. So effectively, you should be paying us 4.5 zuz for the work of half of our day. So Kamash Malan, Damar Lahu. So the Tana teaches us by telling us that no, he only has to pay the zuz. He Amr Lahu Tfei Zuzah. When I told you that I was going to pay you an extra zuz for the job, Delo Habakim Lahu. That is where it was unclear how much the wage was. And some people had it at 7, some people might have had it at 8. And so as a result, I was going to give you the extra zuz. But Hashta Kimlachu. But now everybody agrees exactly what it's worth, and I'm not going to pay you anything extra. And we say that the boss, the employer, is allowed to make such a statement. So that was the first half of the brisa, and the second half of the brisa is Rabbi Dosa. And Rabbi Dosa disagrees and says, no, you don't have to pay the worker the full amount that you agreed to. Rabbi Dosa Omer, Shaman Lahen es Masha Asid Asos. You have to figure out how much still needs to be done. And that's what you deduct. So whereas the Tanakama focused on what was accomplished, Rabbi Dosa says you focus on what was yet to be accomplished. So Haya Yafa Shisha Dinarim, if what's left to be accomplished would be valued at 6 dinar, and you or 6 zuz, so then you need to I'm sorry, 6 zuz. So then Nozin Lahem shekel, you only give the person 2 dinar because you agreed to pay 8 dinar for the entire day. They did half the day, and although half the day ordinarily would align with 4 dinar, well, tough luck, because now if you were going to hire somebody to finish the job, it would cost 6 dinar to finish the job. So as a result, you take the 8 that they were going to get paid for the whole thing, You take away the 6, which is what you have to pay to make yourself whole, and now they get only 2. So kasavar yad poel al ha-techtona. So it seems clear that Rabbi Dosa says that the worker has the lower hand, meaning that he's disadvantaged when he leaves in the middle. So, O Yigmaru Malach. But Rabbi Dosa added, O Yigmaru Malachtan v'yitlu shnei slime. It said, I'm sorry for not scrolling. It said, he said that if you wanted, you could complete the job and get paid in full. Well, of course, Pshita, that's obvious. Why would you think that the person should get anything different from full payment? Lo tzrika dezal avinta. It's where it's necessary is when it became less expensive for the person to hire other workers. The Amer Balabayas and the person and the employer said something, meaning he said the workers didn't have to finish, and so as a result, he didn't want to go back. He didn't want to have them finish the job. And the workers, begged him and got him to agree to let them finish the job. So Ma'adatema, what might I have thought? Matzi Amar Lahu, that the employer could say to the workers, Adaita de Bitsrisu li ma'agrai. I should only have to pay you the lower wages because that's how you appeased me. Kamash Vlada Amrile. No, Rabbi Dosa would say that the workers could tell the employer, Adaita de Avdina lay Abita Shapirta. No, we were just trying to tell you that we were going to work really hard and really do great work, and that was the basis for you taking us back. So we're not going to. You don't get to pay us the lower wage. Stella, we said that if the work agreed to that was so far completed was worth, that needed to happen was worth a Stella. Well, then Nozin Lamb Stella, then he'd have to give them a Stella because he agreed to 2 Stella for the day, and so as a result, he would have to pay 1 Stella for the half day. Well, Pshita, that's obvious. So I'm a Rav Huna braid the Rav Nasan. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Natan, low. It's not obvious. Suricha de Ozil in Hugabe Zuza Mikara. No, it was a situation where the workers really should have gotten 9 zuz for the day. Ulsov zalavite. But in the end, they agreed to take the 8 zuz. So Maudatema, Butzer Zuze Amrituli. That the employer might be able to say, listen, you agreed to work for 1 zuz less than whatever the regular rate was. So now that the rate went down to 8, I should only have to pay you based on a 7 zuz payment. So Butzer zuz, I should give you 1 zuz less. So Kamash Malan to Amrilay. So again, Rabbi Dosa says, again, comparable, just the flip side of the rabbis who were in the Tanakama, that the workers now could say, Ki Amrina Lach B'Vatzer Zuzah, when did we tell you that you could pay us a zuz less? Delo Hava Kim Lach. That's where it was unclear what workers were going to get paid, what the going rate was. But hush to Kimla. But now that we know what the going rate is, and it's very clear that all workers are getting 8, we're not going to give you a discount. So again, that is the completion of the brisa. And so
I got a little confused between dinar, zuz, and selim, what's the equivalency ratio?
So dinar and zuz are identical.
Okay.
Stella is 4 of either.
All right.
Okay, it is a little confusing because they switched to dinar, but it's 4 dinar is a zuz and 4 dinar is a sella and 4 zuz is a sella as well. So dinar and zuz are effectively alternatives in this Gemara's discussion. So Amar Rav tells us halacha Rabbi Dosa. The halacha is like Rabbi Dosa, meaning that workers have the lower hand. So now, Umi Amar Rav Hachi, did Rav really say that? Because we have another statement that said, V'Amar Rav Poel, that a worker yachol laxor bo afilu b'chatzi hayom. A worker can leave his work even in the middle of the day, implying that he'll get his full payment. So how could we say that that's not the case? We seem to have two inconsistent statements of Rav. V'chi tema shiny leila Rabbi Dosa ben schiros lekablanus. Well, now maybe we can distinguish between two types of workers. One is a worker who was hired for the day, and one
Uh-huh.
is worker who was hired for the job. When you're hired for the day, so then we won't penalize you for leaving because you were hired on an hourly basis effectively, and you did the full work of the hours for which you did the work, and so you get fully paid. But if the employee or specifically told you, the worker, that you need to do the whole job and I'm paying you to finish the job, well, then we would say your hand is on the bottom. And by the way, we are going to end up saying that this is the case, okay? But umi shiny late. But we're going to ask at the moment, does Rebbe Dosa make such a distinction? And by the way, just to tell us where we're going to end, we're going to say that Rebbe Dosa actually does not make such a distinction, but Rav does make such a distinction. So let's go through it and we'll see it inside. So
So if the worker doesn't finish the job and it takes him 3 days, even though the owner thought it should have taken him a day, though it's on the owner and it's on the worker to finish that job. If it takes him a day or 3 days or 6 days.
If he was hired by the job, that certainly seems to be the case. Correct. But when second, does Rabbi Dosa distinguish between day workers and job workers? But Tanya, we've got a brisa. Hasocher as a poel, if you hire a worker, lechatzi hayom shama shemes lo mes, and then in the middle of the day, the worker hears that the relative died, osha achazatu chama, or he becomes very hot, meaning he has some kind of fever. Im safirhu, if he was hired by the day. So then, as we turn to Ayin Zion Amabed, notain lo scharo, you have to give him the wage that he's due for half the day of work. Im kablanhu, and if he was hired for the job, notain lo kablano. So you have to give him the prorated version of the fee based on what he was able to perform. So basically, no matter what, he's not penalized for leaving the job. So money. Who could you say this brisa follows? Because Elam Rabbanan, if you want to tell me it's the rabbis, me Irya Shama Shemes Lo Mace, why did the brisa talk about somebody hearing about a relative dying? Osha Achazatu Chama, or having a fever. To honest, those are all circumstances where the worker was forced beyond his control to stop the job. Kilo honest nami, and yet, because the rabbis say that even if the worker just decided that he didn't want to do the work, even if he wasn't forced to do so. So ha'amru rabbanan yad poel al yona. The rabbis say that the worker has the upper hand and gets fully paid for the work that he does. So this brisa can't be the Tanakama of our earlier brisa. It must be Rabbi Dosa. El Rabbi Dosa. It's got to be Rabbi Dosa. Ushmamina, and this all shows lo shani lay. He does not Rabbi Dosa bein schirot lekablanut. He does not distinguish between hiring by the day and hiring for the job. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak gives us an explanation as to how we can understand that actually there is maybe Rabbi Dosa does distinguish between hiring by the day and hiring by the job. And why is it? B'davar ha'avud, that in certain circumstances, when there's going to be a loss, when meaning if the work is stopped, there will be a loss on the project. Well, then v'divrei hakol. Then everybody agrees, both the Tanakama and Rabbi Dosa agree that the yad of the worker is al hatachtona. Then the worker is disadvantaged, and it's. But where is the debate? The debate is only when you don't have this loss that's associated with it. And so as a result, that's the situation where we don't have any contradiction between Rav's statements. So when Rav made his second statement of saying V'amar Rav Poel Yachol Laxer Bo Afilu B'Chatzi Hayom, that was a statement that was made when the work did not, when stopping the work, would not cause any kind of loss for the employer. And when he said that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa, that was when the stoppage of work would cause a problem. Okay. So, Tanan, 1 second. There's
So
another.
wait, are you saying it says v'divrei call? It's not. We're saying that the worker gets his full payment, right, for the day or the job, right? Even if if he's an illness, right? So
If
therefore,
he's
in that case, it seems like he's not v'yad tachtona. He gets what he's entitled to.
let's go through it. You are correct that Rabbi Dosa would say that if the worker left beyond his control, he would get paid in full, whether he was whatever kind of worker he was. And he, but if in fact, and if in fact there was a loss associated with it, then also he would get paid. Then everybody agrees that the payment of the worker is the worker does not win, the worker loses, and the machlokes is only about where the worker leaves voluntarily, and and there's no loss associated with it. That's the situation where there's a debate, and that's the situation where we say that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa in the case of a worker who works for the job. But if the worker works for the day, well, then he won't be penalized for withdrawing, even if there's no loss that's associated with it.
So if he's working for the day, then divrei call that he receives his full wages.
No. Yes, correct. If he works for the day, then he's going to get the full wages, because we're going to say that Rabbi Dosa does distinguish between the two types of workers. And if the worker is hired by the day, he's not going to be penalized for withdrawing. When Rav said that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa, he's saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa with respect to the worker by the job. That when a worker by the job goes off the job, so then the worker's hand is on the bottom.
I don't know. It says here that Rabbi Dosa lo shani leil Rabbi Dosa ben skiro da kablanut. Right, then it would seem that it doesn't make a difference for him whether
that was the question that we asked, and we're going to get back to that question in another moment. So I don't know what you're looking at the moment, but if you're looking at Rashi, you may be looking at Rashi either on the Havamina, or on the next question, because we're going to end up saying again that Rabbi Dosa does not distinguish. So you have to recognize that we're in the middle of the Gemara at the moment. So again, Rabbi Dosa, according to the moment that we're in at this moment, distinguishes between two types of workers. And the Gemara asks again, Tnan, Kol HaMishana Yado Ala Tachtona. That again, anyone who deviates the job, that person is going to have the lower hand. And we're going to see that this is going to be covered by a Mishnah on Ayin Chet Amabet, and V'chol HaChozer Bo. And if you undo your deal, meaning if you go back on your deal, Yado Ala Tachtona, you also have the lower hand. So Bishlam Kol Mishana Yado Ala Tachtona, when we say that the person who changes things has the lower hand, Samlan Tana Rabbi Yehuda, that's because our Tana is ruling like Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda is going to see, we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda on the Mishnah on Ayin Chedem and Bet is going to say that if the job gets changed, such as the worker uses the wrong color, so then the worker has the lower hand, and he either only gets his expenses or he gets what the value that he conveyed whichever is less. Ela kol hachozer bo yadu al hatachtona. But whenever somebody reneges, that person has a lower hand. What is that coming to include? Doesn't that include lav lasuye poel? Doesn't it include even a day worker who works and uka rebidosa, and it's like rebidosa, meaning that there's no difference between a day worker and a job worker, and so as a result, doesn't that show that in fact there's no distinction? And your last answer had to make a distinction. So now we give another answer and we actually say, correct, Ella Rabbi Dosa Tarti Kamar. Rabbi Dosi has two rulings. One ruling is with respect to job workers, and one ruling is with respect to day workers. And although he says that both day workers and job workers are penalized for abandoning their work, the Rav Savar la Kavase Bechada, Rav agreed with him in one case, and he disagreed with him in another case. So Rav would say that if you hire the worker for the job, so then the worker's yad is al tachtona. But if you hire the worker for the day, well, then the worker's hand is al ha'elyona. And so even though when he said the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa, he was saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa only with respect to job workers and not day workers. So that's one possibility. The e-biasema, or you could say, no, we could say that actually Rabbi Dosa does distinguish. And when Rav said that the halakha is like Rabbi Dosa, he really meant that the halakha is exactly like Rabbi Dosa. And Rabbi Dosa himself says that a day worker has yad al ha'elyona, and it's only a job worker who has yad al ha'tachtona. And the explanation of this Mishnah of when we say e-biasema, you can alternatively say when we say kol hachozer bo yado al tachtona, that the person who reneges has the lower hand, it is reflective of a brisa. Look at Tanya. It's like we saw it in a brisa. Kol hachozer bo ketzad. What does it mean, the person who reneges? So that's harei shemachar sada lechaveru be'elef zuz. We're dealing with a situation where A sold a field to B for 1,000 zuz. And of the money that he owed him, he gave him 200 zuz as a down payment. Now we had the seller reneging. So yad lo keach al ha'elyona. So the buyer has the upper hand. Ratza omer lo tainli mosai. He could say, listen, I want my $200 back. Or, oh, tainli karka keneged mosai. Or give me land equal to the $200 that I already gave you. I don't get the whole property because I didn't pay you. And so as a result, the deal wasn't finished. And I never, according to this, I never made a formal kinyan on the entire field. So mehechan magbiu. Well, how do I collect from the seller as the purchaser? Min ha'idis. The seller has to give me the best of the land. And on the other hand, what happens if the buyer leaves the deal? Well, then yad mocher ha'elyona. Then the seller's hand is on the top. Ratza omer lo helach mosecha. He can go and give back the $200 that was given. Ratza omer helach karka keneged mosecha. Or he can give him the $200 worth of land. And from what land does he give him? Minaziboris, you give him from the worst of the land. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, again, this is a continuation of the Brisa. We teach them how they can avoid having to renege, meaning there's a way that this deal could have been finalized from the beginning. Ketzad, how would it have been finalized immediately? Kozevlo, we can have the seller write, Ani Ploni ben Ploni, this person, Macharti Sada Ploni Leploni be'elef zuz. I am selling this field for 1,000 zuz. V'nosanli mehem masayim zuz. And he's given me 200 zuz. V'hareini noshe bo chet meot zuz. And I am taking a claim from him of 800 zuz. Kana. In that situation, it's not that it's just a down payment. It's a payment of the full amount and a loan of the remaining 800. So kana, In that situation, the acquirer buys the field immediately. Umachzer lo es hashar afilu achar kama shanim, and he owes the rest of the money even if he pays several years later, because the bottom line is it's a debt, and the debt must get paid. Amar Mar. So okay, so we just said as we studied this brisa. Now we're going to consider two aspects of the brisa. We said that if the seller reneges mehekan magbihu, where do you get the where does the purchaser get land from? Mina idis, he gets the best land. Well, kasalka daitek idis nechasab. Are you saying that he gets the best of all of his land? Because that seems a little excessive. Because below Yehei Ela Balcho, all this guy is a creditor. Utanan, and we have a Mishnah, Balcho Dino Bevenunis. A creditor is supposed to get average land, not the best land. Va'od Moreover, he was buying this land, not any property. So what basis does he have to claim the best property of the seller when it had nothing to do with the property that was being purchased at this moment? So Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak explains, Me'idis Sheba, Umiziburis Sheba, when we said that the buyer gets the best land if the seller backs out, and the seller can give the worst land if the buyer backs out, we're talking about of the land that was being sold, not of all of the seller's property. Alternatively, Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ikar Amar, Rav Acha explains, no, afilu tema me'idis nechasav. You can actually explain that when we said that you have to give the best, we do mean the best of all the properties. Because stam man dezavin arab alpha zuze, that if you're going to buy land for 1,000 zuz, azule ozule mozel mizabin nechasav, you probably had to sell some of your assets in a fire sale basis that resulted in you in selling them at a cheaper value. And now you're like somebody who was damaged. Utanan hanizakin, when it comes to those who were damaged, shaman lahen be'idis. We determine what they're paid. They get paid out of the best land. And so as a result, that's why in this brisa, we say that you get paid from the best land. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, we again quoting from our brisa, Malamdinosan shalo yaksaru ketzad kosev lo ani ploni ben ploni v'chulu. We explain that if we tell the person to write that the rest of the purchase is a loan, that's how it becomes as if the purchase is immediate. But 1 second, time of the kosev lehachi. Why is it that the buyer only acquired all of the land immediately? It's because this language was written in the document. Hello, kasav haki lo kani. But if he did not write this language in the document, in the sale document, the buyer would not immediately acquire the entire land. But we have a brisa, and you're going to have to be patient because the brisa only gets to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel at the end. But we will see that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says in this brisa that there is a situation where the buyer is considered to have bought all of the land immediately, even though it was a different, even though there was no special language and the full payment was not made. So let's take a look at the brisa. Hanosin arabon lechabero. If you give a pledge, a security to somebody, and the context of this transaction is the following: I agree to sell you land A, and you give me you give me land B as collateral to say, listen, I am definitely going to go through with the purchase of your land A. And I'm so confident that I'm going to do that. V'amarlo, that you say to me, that the person says, Im ani chozerbi, if I renege, irvoni machulacha, I'm going to forfeit my security to you. V'halal omer, and the other one says, Im ani chozerbi, if I refuse to perform, meaning if I don't give you land A, and instead, that you have agreed to buy, and you now give me the money for, Achpo lecha erbovnecha. I'm going to double your security. Not only will I give you property B back, but I'll give you other property that's equivalent to property B. V'niskayim muhatanaim. Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that everybody has to fulfill their stipulation. Now that's because, as the Gemara pauses the brisa to explain, Rabbi Yossi l'tamei. Rabbi Yossi's following his reasoning. The Amar Asmach the Kanya, because he's the one who says that if you make a commitment to do something, even though you have in your mind no intention for that outcome to happen, we say that an asmachta is binding. Again, we have this very frequently when we talk about betting and gambling and other kinds of things that we generally say, and we paskin asmachta lo kanya. So that's not actually how we paskin. But again, Rabbi Yossi says that asmachta kanya, and therefore you can make such a commitment. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, dayo sheyifno keneged erbona. No, if the person comes back and they abandon the deal, well, then all that the purchaser gets, because of course the seller does get to keep the security, but the buyer gets the value of the original property, a portion of the value of the portion of the original property that was being sold, equal to the value of the security that he provided. And Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, when does it apply? When do we say that the person only gets based on the value of the security and not the entire property? Bisman she'amarlo ervon yukon, the security will acquire. Aval makar lo sada be'elav zuz. But if in fact the seller sold the field A for 1,000 zuz, v'nasan lo me'em chamesh me'ot zuz, and the buyer gave him 500 zuz, and there was no security aspect, and it was just, I'm giving this as part of the payment of the entire amount. Kana, the buyer acquires the entire field. Umakzer lo as hashara filulacher kamashanim, and he has to pay the balance even after several years. And here, Rabban Shimon Gamliel mentions nothing about writing that the rest of the amount is a loan. That is a very different ruling than the ruling that we saw 2 minutes ago in the brisa, where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that you have to have written in the sale document that the rest of the amount is a loan. So why in one place do we assume that it's a loan, and in another place it has to be written that it's a loan? So the Gemara explains, lo kasha. The question is the attitude of the seller. The attitude of the seller will tell us the nature of the transaction. If the seller is always on the buyer saying, give me my money, give me my money, give me my money, I want the rest of my money, you need to give me the rest of my money, well then clearly the intention of the seller is that the whole amount is not sold to the person until the full value is paid, because he's always after the rest of the money. And clearly that's an indication of an attitude that says this is only going to be a good sale if in fact you give me the full amount. And until you give me the full amount, you haven't necessarily bought anything. And at the very most, you've bought a proportional amount. But if, on the other hand, the seller is not constantly hounding the buyer, then clearly the intention is to sell the whole amount and the rest is a loan. And so as a result, he doesn't need to immediately be hounding the buyer to go after him. To Amar Rava, and we have a statement of Rava that supports this. If you sell something to your friend, and you go and you're trying to chase that zuz after him, you're trying to chase the money after him, lo kani, then the purchaser does not acquire it. Lo ka'ayel v'nafik azuzi, but if you don't go in and try and chase the purchaser for the rest of the money, well then kani, that's already going to enable a buyer to acquire the real property that we're talking about.
But isn't the $500 that he puts down I mean, in both cases, he puts down $500. So how do we know that in one case we think of it as an eravon, and another case we think of it as a
100%.
kinyan?
The question is, what is the seller doing? If the seller immediately goes and says, buyer, you got to give me the rest of the money, not even waiting a day, and he keeps doing that every day, well, then we can tell retroactively the intention of the seller. And clearly, in that case, the intention of the seller is not for it to be a full sale, but rather it's a down payment. And until the full payment is made, the sale is not complete. On the other hand, if the seller sells and the buyer pays that $500 down payment, and the seller goes his merry way and just knows that he's going to be able to collect at some point, well, then in that situation, clearly the intention was to convey the entire field immediately, and what's left is clearly intended to be a loan. And so, if you want to be able to chase the buyer immediately and have the sale be complete immediately, the seller needs to write into the document the intention that the sale is complete immediately and the rest is a loan.
And it's a loan, and it's not a collateral. Then it's not here.
Correct, and it's not just collateral. Exactly. Okay, so v'amar Rabba, Haiman de ose mea zuze lechabre. If you lend 100 zuz, upare zuz, and the guy pays back 1 zuz at a time, well, then that's really going to be terrible. Payron, hubby, it's a good repayment, but the lender has some complaints that he can make. Now, again, no money as a result of these complaints, but he can be upset. We understand. We can be empathetic with his concerns because the he could say, "Avsadidtinu minai, you caused me to lose this 100 zuz." And there are a couple of possible explanations that are noted here. One is that it's a lot harder to guard 1 zuz at a time, and also you could think that that 1 zuz, what is it? I'm going to spend it, and so all of a sudden you're a lot freer with if I think about my own wallet, right? If I have 20 singles in it, I those singles leave my wallet a lot faster than a $20 bill, because the $20 bill, I'm like, oh, I got $20 in my wallet. That's a $20. I'm not going to break it. It's a pain in the behind. I will keep it whole, and only when I really, really need to spend it am I going to spend it. But when it comes to a single dollar, oh, I got a candy bar for $1, etc. I might as well take advantage of it. So that is the story, and it highlights that 1 zuz may not be important. Now, once we've said that, we've got somebody who's selling, and Rashi tells us here that we're talking about a chamor, even though chamor is usually wine, we're talking about a donkey. And because we're going to see that the key question is can it be split up? Ufashle chadzuza, and the payment was paid completely, it's minus 1 zuz. And the seller was hounding the buyer for that 1 zuz. So Yosef Rav Ashi become ayanba. So Rav Ashi was thinking about the case. Do we say that because of 1 zuz, nobody pays attention to it, and therefore we'll treat it as a full transaction? Or do we say no, 1 zuz is important because we've seen that the seller is chasing the buyer for it, and so as a result, it's not a valid sale. So Amar Laim Rav Mardechai, the Rav Ashi Yaki, Amar Ravimi, Mahargon Mishmei de Rava. So Rav Avimi said from Hagronia, said in the name of Rava, Zuza Kizuze Dami, that 1 zuz is just like lots of zuz, below cunning, and it's not an acquisition. So Amrle Acha Brei de Yosef Ravashi, Amrina Mishmei de Rava Kani. But one second, we have a statement that says that Rava says that it is Kona. And of course, Rava is the one who said before that it was not Kona if you're chasing him. So it must be that there was also a ruling in which one zuz was left over, and Rava said it was a good sale, and maybe that was based on the attitude of Rava saying that when you have 100 zuz loan and you pay it back one at a time, it's as if you've taken away all the money from the lender. Amr lei to targem shmatzich v'mocher sadehu. No, your ruling of Rava refers to somebody who's selling his field mipnei ra'ata because it was bad. So if in fact the field was bad and there's one zuz left over, so then one can understand that the person's going to start chasing the guy immediately because he's worried that the other guy is going to back out of the deal because it was a very advantageous deal for the seller. But in general, when you have one zuz left over, and there's no other facts that would suggest otherwise, if the seller is chasing the money from the buyer, well, then the purchase is not complete until the payment is complete. And so we now have a couple of different principles. Let's first back up to the very beginning. And we say whose hand is on the bottom and whose hand is on the top. A worker's hand is on the bottom if the worker is a job worker. But if the worker is a day worker, then his hand will be on the top if he stops in the middle of the day.
But wasn't there a point about a davar ha'avud in there as well?
When it's a davar ha'avud, then everybody agrees that in both cases the worker's hand will be on the bottom. You're absolutely right. So that's another factor. So when we say that there's a distinction between a job worker and a day worker, where we say that the job worker has the lower hand and the day worker has the upper hand, that's where there's no loss associated with the stopping in the middle of the job. But other than paying the worker, paying a new worker. But when the job itself becomes undone because of the stoppage, meaning if I need something to be brought here because I'm going to have a wedding, God willing, and I need the item today for the wedding, and you don't do it, well, then that's a davar ha'avud, and now I'm going to you're going to have yad al hatachtona, whether you're a job worker or a day worker. On the other
who has
hand,
the yad? Who has the yad in this case?
So the employer has the yad al ha'elyona. The employer has the upper hand because it was something that was being lost, and so as a result, if you don't finish the job, and I'm going to have a big loss as a result of it because of my needs, then your hand will certainly be on the bottom, even whether you're a job worker or a day worker. But if it's a normal situation, there is no special loss associated with it, then you will have, then if you're the day worker, you will have the upper hand. But if you're a job worker, since you did it for the job and you didn't finish the job, we're going to put your hand on the bottom.
Is that only according to Rav Dosa?
No, well, this is according to Rav. According to Rav as to what the halacha is. That's what we're explaining. And according to one answer, that Rav Dosa also would make that distinction. According to another answer, no, Rav Dosa does not make such a distinction, and only Rav says that the halacha is like Rav Dosa in one case and not like Rav Dosa in the other case. All right, so that was the first half of the day. Now we got to and as part of doing that, we cited this brisa, and this brisa told us that in fact, if you don't have complete payment, what's left is a loan. If you don't have complete payment, what's left is a loan. But we have another situation because we follow Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, where you don't have complete payment, what's left is not a loan, and you don't have the full purchase until you make complete payment. So how do we distinguish between those two cases? When do you actually have to have it written in the contract that the what's left is a loan? That's where the seller is chasing the buyer. If the seller is chasing the buyer and you don't have anything special in the contract, well, then we're going to assume that the seller is chasing the buyer because the sale is not yet complete until the buyer pays the full amount. But if the seller is not chasing the buyer, then it will be complete. Now, what happens if it's one zuz that's left over? Well, in that situation, we're going to treat it just like there's lots of zuz left over. Oh, we had a case where Rava seemed to say that there was one zuz left over, and yet it was a valid transaction, and the person was chasing the zuz, and the seller was chasing the zuz. That's true. We can say that it's still a valid transaction when the field is terrible. So, so we have an extra caveat that either if the seller is not chasing the buyer, well, then what's left is a loan. Or if what the seller is chasing the buyer is one zuz, and it's because and the property is terrible, well, then even in that situation, what that one zuz is just a loan and not, in fact, an indication that the entire property has not been sold. So those were the various iterations that we went through, but we're not done. We're not done going through special cases where the seller undertakes effort to collect the rest of the purchase price, but due to the circumstances, we might think that the sale is valid immediately. But for the details of that last case, you have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. So have
And where again
wonderful...
does Rav hold like Rav Dosa, and where does he not hold like him? Well, what's
So
the
according to the answer that says Rabbi Dosa does not distinguish between a day laborer and a job laborer, Rav holds like Rabbi Dosa in connection with the day laborer. I'm sorry, in connection with the job laborer. So let me say it again. According to the view that says Rabbi Dosa does not distinguish between day laborers and job laborers, Rav will say that the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa, that the worker's hand is on the bottom with respect to job laborers. However, Rav would say that when it comes to day laborers always have their hand on top, even if they're the ones who back out of the deal. And according to the second answer of the Gemara, Rabbi Dosa also says that. But we don't have to go that far because the first answer says that no, the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa in one and not like Rabbi Dosa in the other, according to Rav. All right. I wish you a wonderful day, and we will pick up at the top of Ayin Chet Amud Aleph, God willing, tomorrow.